This episode of The Edge is brought to you by Audible.com, offering more than 180,000 titles for smartphone, tablet, and desktop. To get a free audiobook of your choice and help Trek.fm at the same time, visit audibletrial.com/trekfm. And also by Enterprise in Space, an international program of the nonprofit National Space Society. Find out how you can help science and education and become a virtual crew member aboard the NSS Enterprise Orbiter by visiting enterpriseinspace.org. And if you want to join the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode, join the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field. We look forward to seeing you there.
You're listening to Trek FM.
What have you done out there on the edge of Federation space?
Hello and welcome to The Edge, Trek FM show about Star Trek Discovery. I'm Mike, and later on in the show, Aaron and Amy will be joined by Davis to talk about Episode 4 of Star Trek Discovery. The lamb doesn't care about the butcher's knife, or I don't know what it is.
Yeah, lambs and butchers don't get along.
Yes, that episode.
The butcher's knife doesn't care about the lamb's cry.
There you go. Thanks.
I don't know if it doesn't care about, whatever.
I think it's something like that. Anyway, Regardless. With me first is Max. How's it going, Max?
All right.
Thanks for joining me. Thanks for getting that title close to right or something.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Star Trek, nobody knows the names of episodes, whatever.
Especially now that they don't put them on the actual shows for the first time in history. So
Yeah.
Before they get into episode 4, we're going to have a little chat about After Trek. We're 4 episodes into Discovery, so that's 3 episodes into After Trek. It's going to be confusing until the end, no doubt. And I just thought it would be kind of interesting to talk about that thing, that thing which is sort of in the orbit of Discovery. So, now, I know that this is a format which kind of began with The Walking Dead's after show, The Talking Dead, which, just makes sense. It's like, hey, you have a bunch of viewers who are tuning in. You want to, program something afterwards that's going to, make them stick around. And, what better way than to have, some people talk about the thing you just watched. And Talking Dead, really took off, and that spawned a bunch of other shows, like Talking Bad. Doesn't work nearly as well as a title. There was one that Will Wheaton hosted for Falling Skies.
Yep.
Was it called Talking Skies? Probably.
I think it was Alien Talk with Will Wheaton. I don't know.
All right.
It's made up.
If that was the case, Talking Bad...
But I watched that show, and I don't remember what it was called.
Okay, yeah. Talking Bad, you can kind of get away with because you got the Breaking Bad. If it is Talking Skies, okay, fine, you got Falling Skies. But originally, this was going to be called Talking Trek. And I was like, are you guys even trying anymore? Come on, guys. What I thought immediately, I was like, no, call it something like Disco After Party. And I think I even tweeted that. And then I was like, oh, shoot. And then I quickly deleted that tweet and stole the Twitter handle, at Disco After Party and everything, and the Gmail account, because I was like, oh, I'm going to name my show that, Yeah. And then I ended up not doing that. But yeah, but then they changed it to After Trek, which doesn't have the same ring to it that Talking Dead does,
Yeah, but it's also it's descriptive, like Disco After Party. The problem there is if you don't know what it is, you'd see it and go, "That sounds insane."
I guess so. And, I can forgive them, for that or whatever. And ultimately, I guess it doesn't matter. But yeah, Now, I know, like, I remember from our conversations that you were a big fan of The Talking Dead, so much so that at one point you were like, the only reason why I'm still watching The Walking Dead is so that I can also watch The Talking Dead, which is much better than The Walking Dead.
Yeah, I stand by that. Like, there's something about, like, I mean, Chris Hardwick is a very charming host for that show, and I do sort of tend to, like, enjoy, you know, conversations and dialogue and people talking. Like, I listen to podcasts more than I do music because it's people talking, and I find that I can get very engaged with it. And when people are just having a conversation and the conversation flows and people talk about what they're talking about in whatever way that particular person and like how they engage with it, like I respond to that. And like there are times where like they have a lot of fun and it's very enjoyable and you get a good guest and then it's really interesting. And if you don't have a good guest, you just have Chris Hardwick talking to people who like the show and they have a good conversation about it. Like my ideal scenario is, you know, like just a conversation about interesting subjects. And when you have something like The Walking Dead or Falling Skies or Star Trek Discovery, it's just a good jumping off point for a good conversation. And that's kind of the only problem I have with any of them. They're always kind of bound in with that little structure that doesn't allow them to just meander onto the subject of like that new Blade Runner movie. What do you think of that? You know?
Well, that's kind of, I mean, something which I think is a philosophy that the two of us have personally adopted in our podcasting, and one which we've been heavily criticized for in the past. You know, basically,
I want to know what Jason Isaac thinks about the new Blade Runner movie.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, we sort of we took that so to heart, I guess, that when we were doing audio commentaries, we got so much criticism that we were like, why don't we just do a show where we can go off topic and call it Off Topic?
I will say that you thought that was a good idea. I thought those people are wrong.
That we should just
their feelings are invalid.
Okay, that's fair enough too.
I don't think that they're good people.
All right.
And you know, maybe they should be jailed.
Okay. Well, I guess that's a fair assessment of criticism. Yeah, that sounds healthy. So let me ask you this. As someone who really hasn't seen Talking Dead, aside from maybe like 5 minutes, because I've only seen like 4 episodes of The Walking Dead, how does After Trek compare, both in terms of quality and in terms of format?
I mean, in terms of quality, it varies wildly episode to episode, because like sometimes like they have an interesting conversation and it's spur of the moment. It happens or it doesn't happen, you know, like, it's the rhythm of conversation, and not all your conversations are going to be interesting. And like After Trek kind of circumvents the problem of like relying on an interesting conversation by having like segments and like doing it like it's more like a traditional talk show where like they have guests and they introduce a segment and they talk about a subject, and the conversation doesn't drive everything. And yeah, you know, I would say that it is, you know, it's structured as good. Matt Meyer is just as good a host at the show as anyone else, so he's doing a great job. It's just, you know, it's the burden of the format. You know, you can't force it to be good. It's just it's got to be good because the guests are good and they have a good thing to talk about. And I think it's going to be more interesting once they're, you know, not dealing with like everything that they can't talk about and they're talking about the things that have happened in the past. I think it's going to evolve and become much more interesting to talk about. But right now it's like no one can say anything.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit frustrating. It's like, Isaacs, come on, admit, at some point you die. We all know this. Just say, yeah, obviously I'm going to die at some point. Like, I'm not going to tell you when, but I mean, yeah, I might get shot, whatever.
They have kind of done that with certain things already. You know, numerous times they've been like, the war is going to end at the end of the season, you know?
Yeah.
Burnham will be redeemed. You know, I mean, they've like flat out said these things. I think almost because they're trying to sort of cut off the criticism of like, what are you doing making a war show? This is Star Trek. It shouldn't be at war. You know,
also kind of like copping to like whatever arbitrary canon rules they've adopted. Like, you know, we can make the Klingons radically different looking, but like we can't change the dates of things.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, those dates that radically changed throughout the entire original series, now they're codified and set in stone, and they're on tablets outside of the Discovery writing room. So you can't change those, even though they were changed constantly in those first 3 years, whatever.
Yeah. So, okay. Now, you saying that on like Talking Dead, they have like a varying type of guest, I guess, right? You know, like sometimes it'll be fans, sometimes it'll be like I know they've had like Kevin Smith on the show and everything, and it'll be just weird random people. I mean, so far, you know, 3 episodes in, what we've seen is basically executive producers and cast members, with occasionally throwing it to, you know, fungus guys or whatever, you know, but basically
fungus guys, that's what they're called.
Yeah. Basically it's been people who have worked on the show.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if they're going to open that up further. And I think in some ways that could be interesting, but it almost seems like that's not what they're going for here, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it seems kind of like it's sort of being treated like a promotional wing of the show, which is fair.
Yeah,
I mean, that's
exactly
legitimately what it is,
yeah.
You know. But like, there's something to be said for like opening it up to people who just are interested. Like, I mean, like some of the best, you know, Talking Deads have not had any cast members, but like they just have people who like the show and talk about the show. I mean, Sam Jackson was on that show. I mean, like that's a thing that happens when, you know, you open it up and you get somebody who's really interested and can, you know, have a fun conversation about it. And I think that the show will have to evolve because, you know, that's just the nature of it. It's going to have an audience, and they're going to respond to the fans. I mean, that's what's going to happen, because that's what happens in Star Trek. The conversation between the shows and the fans becomes part of the show. So,
yeah, I mean,
After Trek is going to have to be more proactive in that. So I'm going to be excited about that.
I imagine that, you know, part of it is they want to be like, we're not just ripping off Talking Dead, so we've got to do something which is different, if for no other reason than just because it's different, right?
I also think that's kind of a silly argument, because it's like that's a feeling that people have, like, oh, you're ripping off Talking Dead. And it's like, well, I mean, like, what is the Talking Dead? I mean, it's just a talk show.
Yeah.
Like, all it is a talk show where that starts with a subject. Like, they're just talking about like a show. It's not radically different from any other talk show. It's closer in structure to like any talk show from like the 60s and 70s, and, you know, like radio call-in shows. It's closer in structure to those than like any other thing. So what is the issue of ripping off? It's not an original concept.
Yeah. Well,
it's a very old concept. It's been around forever. The idea of starting with a subject that is a show that just aired is a perfectly reasonable thing.
Yeah.
And it gives you like a touchstone to talk about things, and the subject of the show can be informed by the subject matter. I think it's silly to worry about that. It's just a silly concern to have.
Well, okay, what do you think about the show as it exists today? What you've seen so far after Trek?
I like it. I wish there was more of it. I wish that you know, it was a longer time. I don't like, I want to say time slot, but it's not really a thing. You know, I wish that it just ran for longer, and the conversation went on for a longer period of time, and they had, you know, guests on a couch and they just had a conversation.
Yeah.
Like, I wish that there was just more.
Yeah, I could see it benefiting from being longer. I think that maybe the fact that it is so short makes them kind of like rush through things quicker than maybe I'd like. I would hope for like an in-depth conversation about this show, and what we're getting is more of a late night talk show. And that's in some ways disappointing to me, although at the same time, if I think back to my 14-year-old self, if you would have told me, oh, you know how you watch Star Trek each week? You know how like Voyager's starting up in a couple months? Well, there's going to be a Tonight Show style late night talk show for that on a weekly basis. I'd be like, oh my God, is this heaven? I don't understand. How did we become so lucky? So, I mean, I think maybe it's my expectations of what I thought this thing would be versus what it actually is. But when I, just let go and accept what it is, it's entertaining.
My feeling is like the only thing that would improve the show for me would be if it was just longer. Like, I would prefer it if there wasn't a need to like punctuate things with act breaks because of the artificial like commercial construct that isn't necessary anymore, and like it just was allowed to be a conversation, and when the conversation ended, that would be my ideal scenario. That's the fantasy scenario in my head. But what I'm describing is a podcast.
No, I think that you're right. And I think that would, sort of like be a good way of tackling sort of like both sides of this coin, because you could let the show breathe and have, Myra, be funny, have his shtick. But at the same time, you would have the time to get into these in-depth conversations, which they certainly do touch on, And
Myra is totally capable of that. He's had plenty. I mean, he's old school. He's been around. He knows his stuff.
Oh, yeah.
If he was, like off the chain, as it were, he would blow people away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I don't know. I'm not like super duper thrilled with After Trek by any stretch of the imagination. It's not like I'm going out and saying like, you have to watch this show, or anything, but I am entertained by it. I certainly don't want to miss an episode. The only thing which I don't particularly like, just because of a thing which I'm discovering with this show, is that like
act break.
I really don't know where it's going at all. And I really, really love the fact that I don't know where it's going. So I've gotten to the point now where I'm using my better judgment. I'm not watching the next week on Discovery. And as an extension of that, I don't want to see the, scene from next week's episode. I don't want to see that because I really want to be surprised by what comes next. And I know that this is a promotional tool and they are trying to get people to tune in next week, and tune into this show itself as well. But I really don't want to see that. Aside from that, and a few awkward Skype conversations because of, time delays, through the magic of the internet or whatever, I think that it is a pretty solid after show, and I think they're also going to refine the format. And also, I love the set design and decoration. I want that table. I want those video walls. I want those glasses that they have with their drinks. I want all of that. Yeah,
the chairs don't look very comfortable, though.
Well, chairs don't look very comfortable on Discovery either. So
that's a thing I think about while I'm watching these things. I'm thinking if that chair was more comfortable, they would have a more interesting conversation. Because when you're comfortable, then you talk about stuff in a more in-depth way, as opposed to feeling like on.
Yeah. There you go.
Get some comfortable chairs. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, maybe next season.
Go to IKEA. Get the Marcus.
Is that
it's
a good one?
Solid reclining chair.
Okay, I'll have to check that out. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for joining me for this little segment, Max. It's good to talk to someone about After Trek because haven't really been able to do that much. It's, good to talk about a talk show on a talk show.
This segment could be called After Trek.
All right. Well, thanks for joining me, Max. Now, we're gonna sign off, but we're gonna hand this off to Amy and Aaron to discuss episode 4.
Thank you, Mike and Max, for your thoughts on After Trek, CBS's after show on Discovery. I'm your host, Amy Nelson, and joining me today is Aaron Harvey and Davis Grayson. Aaron, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing good. We are into Star Trek. If you go to CBS All Access and you look at the thing, you actually have to scroll to the next screen to get the next episode. So we're actually getting to the point where we have a few under our belt. So it's very exciting. I'm glad to be here to talk about it.
Yes. And Davis, this is the first time that you are here on The Edge. Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Well, first off, I just got to say thank you so much for allowing me to be participating with you on The Edge, because we get to finally talk about new Star Trek. How cool is that? I have been a patron for a few years now, and I've actually one of the hosts of the Phantom Podcast Network's podcast known as Couch Potato Theater, where we talk about cult classics, hidden gems, and just fun favorite movies. So if you ever get a chance, you want to listen to that, definitely check us out.
Yeah. Now,
Awesome.
Davis, I know you because on my very first roundtable, you were on there, and I was so excited because, I saw you on the Babel conference, and so that's been quite a couple of years ago, right?
It has
Maybe
been.
a year and a half?
At least that long, maybe. I mean, because I remember, and now look at you now. You're the host of Earl Grey and The Edge.
I know. My gosh, it's amazing what being on the Patrons Roundtable. So listeners, get on that roundtable.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Never know where you end up.
Well, we're here to discuss episode 4, The Butcher's Knife Cares Not for the Lamb's Cry. That is a very interesting title. Aaron, what did you think of it?
I was excited that we are continuing the tradition of the TOS, TAS sort of long form titles. And of course, when I first heard that, I immediately was like, okay, does it have more letters than For the World is Hollow and I Have Touched the Sky? Are we counting spaces? It was like, I didn't know. No, it's slightly shorter. So it's the second longest title in all of Star Trek. But I like it because that and like Battle of the Binary Stars and stuff has very much like in the animated series, which I'm a host of our animated series podcast. We have one of our planets is missing. How Sharper Than a Serpent's Tooth. It has a little bit of that feel to it. So I'm glad that we're not going back to the late 90s, early 2000s with the something or one word or just void or just like whatever the episode is. It's evocative, and I think that's really cool. And I'm glad that we also are not necessarily repeating the title in every episode, because that would get a little cheesy, I think.
Yeah, it was interesting when I saw this title and I did my post on the Babel conference for postcards. Like immediately, even before the episode had dropped, people were starting to ask questions. What does this mean? And who's going to say this? Because they, last week, Context is for the Kings, was said by Captain Lorca. And so they were trying to figure out, who's going to say this? And I mean, the title itself just already started the discussion. And so I think it is really a very nice title for this episode. So I wanted to first talk about Captain Lorca. Now, we met him last week, and so we see him again, and I'm just wondering, do you feel that he is consistent with who we met last week? Because I feel like he has this relationship with the crew. Is what's motivating him, and is that what we've seen last week to this week? Aaron?
As we kind of like we were talking about before we started recording, he's consistent in his inconsistency. He's like you can't really pin down his motivation. So he might be evil. He might just be really concerned. He might just be power hungry. He might not, it's like there's where he's coming from is not really clear. So it really depends on the scene. You're like, okay, he's putting these people together because he thinks that they'll actually get results. He's doing this because he's really upset that this many people have died in the war. He's putting these people together or he's doing this thing. I don't know why, because it just seems like he's twirling his mustache. You don't quite know. And I think that's actually, instead of being frustrating, it's actually kind of compelling. I'm like, okay, we know that Discovery is not going to be like other Star Treks where you can watch an episode and get an idea of what's happening. It's chapter by chapter. So you have to take the whole season as a story, basically. So I want to see how this plays out and how he, in his inconsistencies, it comes together to make a reason for how he's acting. So the complicated answer is yes and no, but probably yes, he's consistent.
With being inconsistent.
Inconsistent, yes. Yeah. Nothing he did was, to me, felt like, well, that's not what the character in the last episode would have done. It's like, what he's doing doesn't surprise me. I guess that's a good way of putting it.
Davis, what do you feel about Captain Lorca?
Captain Lorca, as I agree with Christopher Jones, that he is a reminiscence of Maha Kahinzi of Calhoun from Star Trek The New Frontier, but also look at him as more of an enigma, also just because he seems to be motivating them in such a way that they're almost scared of him. Almost like the high school basketball coach that would tell you to keep running and pushing you harder and harder to be able to win that game that you're gunning for, everything. So
yeah, I mean, and we can talk about his leadership style, because you mentioned that, like, they're doing that battle simulation and that didn't end up well, and Landry's like, we'll do better, and then he's like, well, you can't do any worse. I mean, is that supposed to motivate the crew? Or I mean, he's ruling, I think, with fear. And is that what's going to be best for this crew, who may or may not be so naive, who've never been in battle before? Is this the best way to just shove them into the fire?
When I looked at Burnham and him as they were walking, he even tells her, we are the tip of the spear, yet we have a shipload of scientists. And he's very frustrated at that because he knows what the consequences are. He knows how powerful the Klingons can be. And if we don't do something about this, and if he doesn't motivate them and push them to that limit, they're going to lose the war. And since they are the only ship that can actually have that spore drive, and they're the only ship that can actually go from one area to another very quickly, they're the only chance that the Federation will be able to win this war.
Well, we can see he is so strategic that way, going into his war room and, all these banned or the most deadly weapons, and, that he studies war and the strategy. And we can see that when he comes into the mining colony and the crew are like, oh my gosh, we're just sitting here. They're like, I'll stop. We're going to let the ships come in, and we can see the strategies of war at play. And so is the crew, following his orders? And does that lead to them trusting him? Or are they just following orders? Like, how do you feel that the crew is relating to Captain Lorca?
I think in that moment when they had, appeared over Corvan II and they were fighting, I think that moment might be slightly separate from how the rest of the time, because their drive worked for the first time ever, showed up over this planet, did what it was supposed to do, and they're looking to him. It's like, okay, we're in this moment. Who is the one person who can actually, maybe help us through all this or guide us? I think they look to him because he is the captain. And some things are actually going right. They're like, okay, because except for Saru, who loves to run away from pretty much anything that's a threat, everybody looked pretty okay with what was happening. They were like, okay, we're not like, yay, we'd love to stay here forever, but they weren't like freaking out that they were stuck waiting for these Klingons. And like, okay, go, because it worked, and I think in that moment, we're okay with it. But you can still see in other moments where, Stamets doesn't want to do anything. I mean, that Lorca says, and I don't believe that one instance has just erased everybody's doubt. It might start to be that maybe that's part of the arc of him going towards like being a more. Maybe he doesn't change so much, but the rest of the crew changes. Who knows? It's like it could be a really interesting path to like, well, his tactics haven't changed dramatically, but his success rate has. So let's just do what he says, and that's that. I think that might be a little bit more realistic than having suddenly Lorca becomes, Mr. Family Man and like, sure, come on into my ready room and let's chat about your career. It's like, I don't think that's ever going to happen.
Yeah, agreed.
I think also that they respect him, but I think they also fear him too.
So last week when he met Michael Burnham, like his back was turns toward her. Like he didn't turn around. Like that is a power play, like at like super power play. And then we see again, and he's going to win at every power play there is. In part because he is the captain, and so you don't question the captain. But we see it again when Stamets tries to question the captain and say, "Listen, I'm going to take my spores and I'm going to get out of here." And Captain Lorca's like, "No, you're not. You're not going to go up against me, and you're not going up against the Federation because everything the ship is and has is the Federation." So there's this power struggle, and I don't know. I think it's more on Lorca's side. I don't think Stamets was trying to be power hungry. He was just trying, listen, I want to do my research and just let me be. But Lorca, I think in last week and this week is showing some major power plays that puts him and sets him apart from the rest of the crew. So I think he's using this fear, to his advantage.
You're telling us you want us to watch TNG's power play is what you're telling us.
Or is she trying to tell us that Captain Jellicoe is a better captain?
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's that you might need an attitude adjustment in the minds of your crew if they want Captain Jellicoe over you. It's like,
exactly.
It's like I was thinking about that. I'm like, he doesn't look so bad now.
Yeah, and Jellicoe
I have to put on a uniform. Uh-oh. Yeah. Well, okay, fine.
The best thing for Troy, we all agree.
Yeah, no, totally.
Absolutely.
I had to get Troy in there at least once. So another interesting thing with Captain Lorca, like, why is he standing all the time? I noticed, like, he's eating and he's standing. I don't know, do you guys eat when you stand? But on the bridge, this is where I really noticed it. So he's there. Like, there's going to be some shaking. He's not even holding on to anything. Like, you would think some bar or something where he could hold on to would come up out of the floor. But nothing. I don't even see a captain's chair when he's on the bridge. What is up with him standing all the time?
Maybe he has a battle injury or something, and he can't, like, maybe it hurts to sit. I don't know.
Maybe that, or he's trying to prove how great the inertial dampeners of the ship is.
There you go.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to guess.
I think in any other series, people would have, like, flown across the room by now. So, I mean, it's interesting. Stamets, like, basically whacks his head. That's a more realistic injury for what they're doing. Then I thought that was pretty cool, actually.
Yes.
But if you remember in the last episode, Saru was sitting in the captain's chair. So the captain's chair is being used, maybe not by Lorca. But
yeah, I remembered that, and I was like, yeah, there's the captain's chair. But then when you see it, I don't know, maybe does the captain's chair move, or is it so far in the back
just a
that we don't see it?
Big ass room. It
really is.
It's a bridge that seems like, I remember when we saw the photo originally in Entertainment Weekly, and we're like, oh, well, they must have just pulled everything back, because it's movable for shooting and stuff like that, and they just wanted a big expansive shot for this photo shoot. No, it's just that big on screen too. It's just it's very spacious.
Okay, so now I'm here to say that the Enterprise D is no longer the Hilton of the Stars, because now we've got Discovery with the huge, massive bridge, awesome inertial dampeners, right? Come on now.
No, it still looks more like something technical, like a ship, a battleship or something. I'm sorry, that still is the we called it the flying dentist office. So.
Oh, there you go.
Because it has that sort of, in the 80s when it was on, which is like, because it has that like very relaxing carpet and neutral tones and everything. No, you still have your Hilton is still intact.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure if you wanted it, but it's still yours.
I'll take it. So, another thing with Lorca, do we feel that him wanting to win the war is going to be the excuse for all of his actions? Basically, do the ends justify the means? So when he goes and saves the dilithium mining colony, is that worth it to torture Ripper, which we see? Is that worth it to lose Landry? Is that worth it to have Stamets break his nose and get back to work because I need you? Like, is that who Lorca is, and is that going to be his excuse to do anything that he wants?
Okay, this first a question of like, did he actually save the colony? Is to me, when I look at it, I feel like he wasn't necessarily, his motivation wasn't necessarily to save all those people, but to create an image of a ghost ship, basically, that can appear out of nowhere and then disappear and send that message to the Klingon homeworld. Because there were 84 hours until Starfleet ships were going to get there. They got there in a relatively quick period of time, quickly before the Klingons invaded, destroyed them. We knew that there were still other Klingons in orbit, and then left. Did not offer aid, just left the entire planet. Like, there were people injured. They're like, oh, good, let's get out of here. To what? Where are you going? You have nothing to do. In regular Starfleet procedure, I feel like they would have stayed, rendered aid, waited for the other ships to get there, and then taken off. But he was trying to create this mystique around, like, what is this thing that just appears out of nowhere that Starfleet and then disappears? How do they do that? And to him, that was more important than rendering assistance to the ship. And I kind of feel like that kind of explains part of his, like, the way he's motivated.
I'm so glad you said that. That makes more sense. Davis?
I completely agree. I think he did not want necessarily the praise, that they saved the colony or anything, but he wanted to make sure that the Klingons got the notice that there was a secret or ghost ship that was around that could take them all out, and it could appear out of nowhere.
Yeah, very good. Yes, I like that idea because and you see the little child, and it's like, who saved us, and I'm like, Superman. Okay, why did we need that? And now that explains. Yeah, very good. I like it. Well, let's now talk about Michael Burnham. Like, how do you feel now? We were introduced her to the crew, and now is she fitting in with the crew? What do you think about her relationship? And let's start off with Tilly. How do you think that her and, the roommate situation is going? Davis?
Oh, I think they're the odd couple for sure. I mean, Tilly is so optimistic and still has a lot to learn being a cadet or being fresh out of the academy. But I think it's also, Aaron said it best before we started recording, it was more of a mentorship that could be happening. And I do agree. I think that would actually be a great thing. And, someone who's battle hardened, as such as Burnham is, and has someone who's so fresh, I think it's actually a good thing for them to be together.
Yeah. Aaron?
Yeah, I'm not sure, like you said, like, how did they end up getting put together originally? Because like that's an odd, it might just be literally that was what was left, or that was the room, or because she was a cadet and this is a person that is lower than a cadet, that's where you get to go. I don't believe, given that we have seen Lorca's inability to actually match people up, because he believed that Landry and Burnham would be a great team, which were just like, I don't know what made you think that, but so I think that Tilly is a really interesting character because on the surface, if you look at her, she's sort of like that, a little bit of bumbling, goofy, like how did she even become a cadet? But when you watch her actions, she was in the last episode the first person to call out the Klingon out of the shadows, and she was with the gun drawn, and so she has bravery. When they go into the tardigrade to give him the spores, or her or it, Burnham opens up the pen. And she steps back a little bit, but she isn't like, what I might be, where it's like, well, I saw what happened to Landry, and I'm going to give you these, and I will see you, bye. It's like, so she's brave, and she has ambition. She said that she wants to be a captain, and so she's really interesting. And if anything, it might be possible that they're trying to represent somebody who's on the spectrum, because she has that sort of very smart, but not quite socially fitting in. She kind of diverts her eyes when she's looking at people every once in a while, but she doesn't when she's doing a task. And I know that there was a show, Fringe, that was on Fox a few years back, and they had a parallel universe, a mirror universe in a sense. And one of the characters in the mirror universe was autistic. And the actress was playing her like her sister, who actually had autism. And it had some similar facial expressions and movements and things like that. So I don't know if they're doing that or if I'm just reading into that, because that's sort of a thing that a lot of people have been talking about lately, more so than when Star Trek was on last. But I think it's kind of interesting. I really like her, and I like her for that depth, that she's not just the comic relief, goofy sidekick, roommate.
Yeah, when I see Tilly, I still see Reginald Barclay. Like, that's who, that's Reg. Who she is. And Reg is very adept. He's very good at his job. He's got a good heart. And I think, he's very efficient. And I see that in Tilly. You're right. She is very skilled. She knows her job. She is courageous and fearless and, is going to go to bat for you. And you can see her compassion, like when she brings Burnham the little case, or the big case, in my opinion, like, here, I was going to do this I noticed you were busy, and so I'm going to pick this up for you, and I'm bringing it to you, and and so she has that compassion. But you're right, she's not quite sure the social aspect of, how do I give someone this case? I thought about them, but what are the right words? What's the correct appropriate interaction, and how do I do this? And so I think you're right. I think, Star Trek is showing more diversity in not just color of skin or nationality or, with their actors, but with, being on the autism spectrum as well. I really like how they are, like, Tilly is, coming in and being all talkative, and then Burnham's like, all right, use your words, less words. Oh, yeah. Like, so there's that mentorship there, but it's a two-way street, because at the end of the episode, Tilly is the one who pushes Michael to actually open up the will and testament of Captain Giorgio. So we get that it's becoming a beneficial relationship for both of them. And so I'm sort of looking forward to see how that relationship develops and if it will stay true to that. So what did we think about Burnham and Saru? Because that's sort of we've seen them together since day one, episode 1. So how are we feeling about Saru, Aaron?
Well, it doesn't seem like a dramatic change has occurred in their interactions. I think that Michael is probably more willing to be a little less falling back into the pattern of their old relationship, but Saru definitely is like, nope, you haven't changed. Like, you're perfect for this crew, basically. Sort of like, which is this horrible backhanded compliment. And, I'm hoping that eventually we get to a point where they're friendly, but part of what makes them is that sort of adversarial, challenging each other. So I think they need to keep that up, but not have it to the point where Saru is like, I don't care about you. If something happens, I'm not going to have your back. I think there needs to be something where he eventually feels that she is, whether he likes her or not, is still going to be there for him. So I think that's going to be an important future scene in some instance. But right now, I don't think we've dramatically changed from even episode 1.
Mm-hmm. Davis, what do you think about Burnham and Saru?
So I have been reading, I don't know if y'all have Desperate Hours. And I gotta say, when I first started hearing their two characters interact with each other, you know, they were a foil. But the odd thing about it is Saru wanted to have a friendship with her, because she was raised by Vulcans, and he thought that would be the best interaction. And it's slowly over time, you could just tell after listening to the book and after re-watching some of the episodes, you know, she's a foil to him. She is really just either just doesn't like him or just doesn't agree with him or just loves to pander him.
So it was interesting to see Michael Burnham call Saru into where Ripper was being held, and she was apologizing to him. And so I was thinking, oh, this is really good. She's trying to build the relationship. But then Saru sort of calls her out on her shit and says, the only reason why you brought me here was to test if this Ripper was a threat or not by testing, you know, if my threat ganglia would appear. And I was thinking about that, and I thought, I can totally see why Saru thinks that, but I don't know if that necessarily means Michael was insincere about her trying to build fences. So was she sincere or wasn't she? Davis, what do you think on that?
I think she was sincere, but I think it was the wrong timing. Because I think also that ever since the battle started, she has changed and she has realized what she has done and what she has lost. And now, you know, Saru is basically the only person that she still has any contact with. Michelle Yeoh's character, Captain Georgiou. And so she's trying to rebuild that, but I think that was just the wrong timing for trying to apologize right there.
Aaron, do you think that she was sincere like Davis?
No, I really do think she, especially when you think back to the last episode where she was talking about, you know, I really wanted to tell you how much I appreciated your words about the captain. So I think that it's in there, but like Davis said, it's just it was the right thing at the wrong time.
Exactly.
And it came out as self-serving.
Okay, so I'm glad that you brought that up last week and what she said. She never apologized. Saru said, "Are you trying to apologize? Are you sorry?" She never said the words. Now, I don't care how difficult it is when it's something that paramount of losing your captain and putting the Federation in war. If you're sincere, you're going to say the words, "I'm sorry." And she never did. And that bugged me about last week's episode. And so for her to do this again of this self-serving, I don't know. It's throwing a big doubt into my mind on her sincerity on really how sorry is she. I'm just going to leave that there. So.
Also, I don't think it's quite as much all her fault as people are kind of laying it all into.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm sorry, without, you know, like, even if they'd just gone back to the ship and done nothing, I still think something horrible would have happened.
Yes.
It's like,
agreed. There is a huge amount of blame, directed at her, which I think, it's not really all of that. I don't know if one person can start this massive war. Yeah. Obviously, there were tensions were high beforehand and stuff. So.
I mean, she did something pretty crappy. I mean, let's be honest. Which, you know, giving the Vulcan nerve pinch to the captain and basically going to countermanding her orders. Yes, that's a mutinous offense. But I don't think it's like you've now put thousands of that might be stretching it.
Yeah. So, what do we think about her relationship with Landry and the fact that we lose Landry this episode?
I'll start this one because people who know me know that I have no love for Landry. I love the actress. I feel like I don't know what happened when I read this morning, it was a tweet that Anthony Rapp had put out talking about how a lot of people were like, this is now the second woman of color that we've lost as characters. And he said, originally that character was supposed to be male. and was like a different person, and they switched people around. And basically, when it was that person wasn't available, it was like, oh, we have an opening for somebody to step in, and this person is a woman, and she's of color, and that's great. We want more diversity. But as you get more diversity, you also get more people who are going to be characters who die or are horrible. So it's sort of interesting that happened. But I just felt like that character, it was just a bunch of cliches glued together with platitudes. It's like I did not understand what her motivation was. She was just, you're garbage, you animals. Like, I'm going to cut this. It was like she was just. She's supposed to be this great tactician. A great tactician does not like, well, I kind of think I maybe done this thing. Let me open the door and just have a Macleth and a phaser, and I'm sure I can take care of it, even though an entire ship of people were killed by it. That's great. Right. But she's just like, that is just idiotic. I mean, it's like, so I do not understand how she made it to where she was if that was the thinking that she had. And I just feel like that character was like, I don't know if it was something that too many cooks in the kitchen or something like that, but it was just, if she was supposed to serve a purpose, I'm not sure what it was besides to let Burnham have more responsibility without supervision, and because that character was always going to plan to die. But I just felt like while she was there, I wish we could have figured out more about why she was the way she was.
Right. Davis, what do you feel about Landry?
Well, she was no Tasha Yar, that's for sure.
I love all the TNG references. A lot of people thought that she was supposed
to be that.
Yeah.
They were just like, oh, I was 100% sure she was an analog for Tasha Yar. I'm just like, I never got that. I don't know why.
No, I never saw that, and I agree with you, Aaron. She just seemed two-dimensional. It just didn't seem like she was, like you said, it may have been like a last-minute change or whatnot. Not saying it was anything bad. I thought that they could have done so much more with this character. And even though she may have been already was in the process of being written off because she was going to be killed off earlier, I still would have liked to have seen more of that character because I think she had a lot of potential.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. And I think if you look at last week's episode and this week's episode, like I felt last week that her and Lorca were like on the same page. They were together. She was his ally, you know, that they were. And I thought, oh, this is going to be a great team effort. And then this week, like even when they put Landry and Burnham together, she is still defending the captain. And she's like, well, Captain thinks with my tactical and your science that we can solve this problem together, you know. So, but then she switches the script and says, and warns Burnham, says, listen, you think that he has you here, but he's here because he's going to use you, not for any other purpose. So then that just added another layer of complexity. And I'm like, why would she say that if last week and up until that point, she was like his ally? I thought that added that level of complexity that I was like, oh, I'm really liking this Landry character. And then, boom, she's gone. So, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if I think you got more out of that interaction than I did because I didn't really. I just like, okay, she's like this loyal officer, but it was, why is she like that? It didn't seem like. And like you said, when she flipped the script, it's like, well, if she realizes that maybe like she was just vying for power in some sort of way, which means like, you know, crazy fan theory 255 is that some of these people are actually from the mirror universe already or something like that. And we have our good characters trapped somewhere else. And when we go to the mirror universe, we find like a Landry that knows how to smile and, you know, a captain who was actually a good captain. I don't know. So that was, we were joking about that, but it feels like, I don't know why. I just like, that was all I was like, why is she here? What does she serve? What purpose is she moving the plot along with? And I never really figured it out. And I really I did want to see more of her because I've always liked her in other roles. And I also thought that it would be more fitting if she went on an airlock because of Battlestar Galactica. I just wanted the tardigrade to push a button and now it closes the door again.
Yeah. So let's move on to the Klingons because there is a lot to discuss with the Klingons.
Yes.
So, Vogue, do you think that he's a good leader?
It's funny you should mention him is because I've heard a few people say that he is the albino, or at least going to be an ancestor of the albino from what we see later on from Blood Oath and everything. But I think he's put into a situation that, Tukumva has actually been killed, and he is right there. They're in a graveyard of ships, which that's another topic for another, question time. But just seeing him like that, I think he's getting desperate to that point, and he might eventually become a great leader, but right now I just see him as doing damage control.
Yeah, he might be a leader by default because the others weren't taken away, right? So they're just sort of... But he does profess many, many times, I'm the torchbearer. I'm the one that Tukuvma, anointed to take his place. So he believes that he's the leader. Just don't know how well he is leading, because when Cole comes in with food, then they're all following Cole now, right?
Yeah. Which doesn't seem very Klingon.
Yeah, where's the loyalty?
Yeah, it's been 6 months, and these are kind of like Klingons that are a little bit more out of time, it feels like, but at the same time, okay. I kind of feel like he is almost a Landry to L'Rell in some ways. It's like, yes, you see him, he is the leader by default of what the story's been telling you, but I feel like L'Rell is using him. It's like she's the leader behind she's the woman behind the man.
Yeah, so what do you think her motivations are? Is she loyal to Vogue, or is she loyal to Cole, or is she loyal to herself?
Herself.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. Yes. Yeah,
Davis,
she is going to be the next great Klingon leader.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you found out that she is part of two houses, or a bridge between two houses, you knew something. She's that instigator, so to speak. She'll use probably both of them to her wit's end, but she'll come out on top.
Remember Sarek in episode 1 said like a great leader needs a great call, or whatever that phrase. It's like, now that's coming back to me. It's like, oh, maybe that isn't necessarily about Tukuvma. It could be a kind of a comment. I mean, yes, it was at the time about him, but I could see that applying to L'Rell as well. Just like as the two houses, and this is something that I don't know if anybody mentioned before, but they mentioned when the computer was like identifying all the symbols on the Klingon spaceship or spacesuit. They said, and then she goes back and talks about it, and she says it's a symbol of a Klingon house or whatever. It's like, but that's the main Klingon symbol that we see. Does that mean that was the house of Tukuvma, and then eventually it becomes the unified Klingon symbol? Although I think we've seen that symbol before in Enterprise, so that might not necessarily work. But that could be an interesting sort of retcon, because it was just like, why would you say a symbol and not the symbol of the Klingon? They don't seem to be that careless with the way they drop down their clues.
And nothing is ever a coincidence, I mean, and even when Cole comes back, he says, your ship has the cloaking device that we don't have. And, everyone has always said, oh, well, they exchanged, the Klingons and the Romulans exchanged, different technology. They got the cloaking device, but who's to say that they didn't have another cloaking device already at one point, and they obtain a different style or different means to it or whatnot. So, I mean, it's interesting. If we just talk about the Klingons for a minute, I think this is the first time we ever hear them actually say, we ate another species such as that. And that kind of threw me for a loop. I'm just going to throw that out there.
And I think that's, again, the fact that they were there for 6 months, and that does not feel like something they would normally do.
Yeah.
Especially when he was just like, well, we don't want to incorporate their ship into our their technology and our ship. It's like, well, you ate the captain. It's just like sort of like, that's
exactly.
That's kind of even less pure. So I really feel that's not a thing that a species who's wanting to be pure of other species would do. I think that was just, I don't want to die.
Right.
And I'm going to justify it by saying whatever I need to say. But a warp drive is just a dilithium crystal too far.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and let's just say, for example, also the ships. Who leaves Starfleet ships after a big battle like that?
They took the telescope.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. And all the little
what was
knickknacks.
That about? Yeah.
And they leave the ship there. Obviously, it's got parts, obviously some technology. And they know that there's Klingons there.
Yeah.
So why did Starfleet not grab it and tow it and take care of their own?
Or destroy it like Lorca did, which is like, fine, do that.
Yeah. And why didn't the Klingons do that as well? This is my main question. Like, the Klingons already know that there is a cloaking device, and they're just going to go away and leave this massive, what could win the war possibility just hanging out there. That makes no sense to me, and I'm a little upset. And so I'm
hoping that does get wrapped up, that we figure out what their thinking was for that.
Yeah. Why were both ships left when we understand and we know that would not happen in real life, as I use
in real Starfleet life?
Yes.
Well, and there was obviously enough people there. I feel like the fact that they took the telescope must have meant that they had other ships come in, rescue the people. There had to have been more than just the ships that were destroyed or fighting, and probably did some cleanup and stuff like that. In which case, then they really were sloppy because they didn't get everything. But at that point, then why didn't they just blow up the Klingon ship or go like, hey, this technology is just sitting here. We should probably figure out what it is. And I don't know. That is a little confusing.
The Federation knew about the cloaking device as well, and they didn't go in and take it by force from the Klingons either when they already were at war. This is a spoil of war, folks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now I'm getting all worked up. I'm not happy here.
Well, I mean, even if you remember in the Dominion War on Deep Space Nine, you saw ships being brought back to Deep Space Nine or Starbase 375 by tugs. Mm-hmm. And they were tugged half across the Alpha Quadrant, just to make sure that nothing was lost, or if something was not salvageable, it's destroyed. I mean, how many other ships have we seen that way to get destroyed? So I thought it was interesting why they did not want to destroy it unless there was nothing left except the hull. But as you could see, they still had the information of the captain and first officer where Vok was looking at it.
Well, I will mention at this time, Next Generation Pegasus, that it took them a long time to go and retrieve that ship. And so maybe that's similar situation. I'm not quite sure, but that's the only time I can think of where they left a ship with technology intact as much as it was floating in this asteroid. And then years later went to try and retrieve it. That's the only time I can think of that's happened.
Well, if you remember in the Pegasus, they actually said they thought it was destroyed. Mm-hmm. They went into the asteroid belt. And that's the same thing with the Stargazer. When Picard abandoned it, he thought it was actually destroyed, and somehow it miraculously survived. So,
yes. Thanks to the Ferengi.
I could probably see both ways about it, but even relating back to Black Hawk Down, if you remember when they left the helicopter, they blew it up. So I mean, I was just thinking maybe they could have done that. I don't know. Maybe they thought it was just too far gone. Nothing was going to be salvaged to it. I don't know.
Well, and looking at the ship, it's as long as all the data is gone. Although we saw that floating pad, so they missed that.
Yeah, the crew manifest.
Yeah, that could have been important.
Yeah.
But the dilithium crystal and the metal of the ship and all this stuff, the rest of it doesn't seem like they are technologically that different than the Klingons at that point or whatever. So it's like, it might just be like, oh no, they have a boat, and it's like in World War II, it's like, okay, it's not going to get them anything. It's, it's just another, broken boat now.
Yeah.
So they might have thought, okay, well, that's fine to leave that there because it's more energy to pull ships away from the line and try to take care of this than not. But obviously somebody, maybe, I don't know. I don't understand how the telescope got off. It's like, figure out how the telescope got off, and then you can kind of put together the rest of the story, I think.
There you go. So I do have one other question while we're talking about the Klingons. So Cole comes in, and he's all humble, kneeling before Voq, and Voq's like, oh, we don't kneel, only our enemies kneel. So why did Cole go through this whole masquerade of trying to be humble and, oh, you're the great Voq, when in the end he fed the crew, got them to follow him? Like, he could have come in and taken it by force. He knew that they'd been adrift for 6 years. He can scan and say, oh, their ship, their sarcophagus ship is not working. Like, why the masquerade? What was the advantage of Cole doing that? Thoughts?
Humiliation?
Was it?
I don't know.
I can see what you're saying there. Yeah.
Maybe he was taking courses from the House of Duras.
Yeah. I have to say, it's like for their motivations seem a little bit more realistic and aligned than Klingons have in the past. At some points, it feels like there is a society somewhere working behind them, as opposed to honor, fight. It's just like there's a little bit of depth to it, which I'm appreciative of. But yeah, I don't. And
I really like how Cole mentions, like, we are unified now, but as soon as this war's over, we're done.
Yeah.
And I like that, so that it's like, oh, we're sort of on this tipping point. Are we really going to get unified to what we know as the Klingon Empire? Or are we going to go back into disarray with all these different houses? I think that added so much to it. Mm-hmm. But I still don't know why Cole came in under this masquerade.
Is he the reverse of Lorca? Where Lorca, rules with intimidation, and this guy actually is like, hey, have some blood wine. It's like, bring in the Orion slave girls or whatever. And then, just gets everybody to be like, hey, you love me, now you'll do anything for me.
Yeah, different leadership style.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. That's just a shot in the dark. So
yeah. All right. Well, I wanted to ask you, and just sort of in closing, I've been doing postcards now, and a lot of people are posting that Star Trek Discovery is too dark. And in this case, we see Ripper going through, destroying, killing Landry. We have the eating of our beloved Captain Philippa Georgiou. So, do you feel that Star Trek is too dark?
Well, I think in this episode, yes. I think it is a little bit darker than I'm normally used to. However, like I said earlier in the podcast, I still feel that this is one whole book. And so this chapter might be darker, but the next episode hopefully will be. Right now, all I've been seeing is just fighting with Klingons. And I'd like to, maybe see something that's different in the next episode, which we have Klingons again, so that won't happen that way, but maybe in the next episode. But I don't know. I think this is a little bit darker than what we're used to, for sure.
Aaron, how are you feeling about this episode?
I feel like what happens isn't necessarily darker than what we've seen or heard about in other Star Trek. It's the fact that we're seeing it the way we're seeing it. It's realistically presented. We've heard of some horrible things happening in Star Trek. We don't necessarily... sometimes it's off screen. There's even the torture of Picard and with the Cardassians. There are 4 lights, and that some of
Chain
that's
of command.
pretty chain of command. Yes.
Yes.
No, I know what it's called. I just, like,
Captain Jellicoe's appearance.
yeah, exactly. That's true. It all comes back to that. The Equinox, actually, Voyager's two-parter
Yes.
has a lot in common with this. In fact, it was like I was when it first started happening. It was just like I'm a little worried that they're sort of just kind of borrowing that. I don't know. It's weird. It's a yes and no answer for me. I think because I think it's appropriate. It's no darker than what the equivalent darker would have been in like the 90s when we were watching it. So it's whatever. It's scaled to the time. It's not darker than Game of Thrones by any means. You know, it's like there's some gruesome stuff in there, but I don't feel that it's so horrible. You know, we don't see them eating the captain. Landry dies, but she's underneath Ripper basically, and you don't see what happens. And when you do actually see her, she just has like lots of abrasions. Mm-hmm. So you know, we're not seeing people aren't walking through puddles of blood. And the last episode where we saw the distorted faces from the spore drive accident reminded me a little bit of the motion picture transporter accident.
Yes.
You know, which you only see them very briefly. You don't see them quite as long. So I think it's more of a change in duration and the sensitivity. But related to that question, the physical darkness of the ship. I've had people like, you know, oh, could they pay some electricity bills and turn on the bridge lights? But if you actually compare the cage and you put pictures next to each other, it's like sometimes the TOS and cage bridges are darker than the rest. And if you go to the rest of the ship is pretty bright. The hallways feel like they have a natural light to them in some ways. It's those big strip lighting. It's like, oh, this is actually kind of pleasant. I did not have the problem with the physical darkness that some people seem to have. Mm-hmm. But no, it's hard to say. This chapter, yes, there were some dark things in it. And what to me feels darker is the souls of the actor. No, the characters. That's where it's like, I think if you have people that are if you like your characters, what happens to them doesn't feel as dark. I know that sounds weird. I mean, until they die, obviously. But yeah. I'm conflicted. You can hear it in my backpedaling every time I say something.
Yeah. Well, and I think it is a dark episode, and I mentioned this on Postcards. So, listeners, sorry if you listened to me yesterday and now I'm listening to me again. But I feel like we've seen dark before. And again, with my TNG love, like they built the Borg, and when I think of who's the enemy of Federation, my mind instantly goes to the Borg. They were, you know, assimilating everyone. Like this is a serious foe. And you're not going to feel that unless you see the body parts coming off and the prosthetics coming on. Like to me, that was pretty dark. And yeah, it was lit up it was well lighted, but it was very dark. Mm-hmm. Now we're still having this dark, and we are recognizing the Klingons as a serious foe for our lovely Federation. But now the lights are turned down a little lower, so now it's dark. No, we've seen this before, with the Borg. And so I think also that you're not, and this is true in life, you're not going to understand the joy and the love unless you have the heartache and the fear. Mm-hmm. And so I think Absolutely. Right now we're in this place where we're experiencing the fear. We're experiencing the terribleness that is this vastness of space that we're going into. And so we have to have yin and yang. We have to have the balance. And so with that said, I wanted to know, do you recognize so far any parts of Gene Roddenberry's vision of this utopian society? Do you see any part of the Star Trek-ness that should be so far?
Well, if it didn't exist, the ship wouldn't be populated with many different races, I don't think.
Okay.
I mean, there are these people who are all together in this one thing, and we saw in the first episode, you know, that certainly did feel more at that point. It was like, oh, okay, yeah, I can totally see that there's a Federation out there. And then when she first meets Lorca, he's like, well, it's like, my family had this business 100 years ago, or what was 100 years? Yeah, it was like 200 years ago, before, there were needs and wants, and we got rid of all of that. Well, but you're making it come back with, so it feels like, yes, there is that thing. We just haven't necessarily seen it, but there is a vast federation of people, and they all, in general, seem to be, getting along.
Yeah. Davis, do you see Gene Roddenberry's vision or his philosophy anywhere in Discovery?
I do. And I do see some of it, like what Aaron said. I mean, there was, on the Sinjo, there was a lot of populated different characters, and even in Desperate Hours, there is an Andorian commander. So I thought that was just extremely cool. I wish we could have seen it on screen, but
I know I want an Andorian captain. That's what I was hoping for.
I know, it would have been so cool, but I do see that. However, if we look back at even Deep Space Nine, when the Dominion War happened, there was some dark times with that. But as Winston Churchill once said, when you're going through hell, you got to keep going. So sometimes, it's going to be really dark, and then sometimes it's going to be really light. So I think at the end of this season, we'll see how everything fits all together. And I think that we'll see Gene Roddenberry's vision in that once we see everything all at one time, which I'm just going to say, I wish they would have dropped all 13 episodes or 15 episodes all at one time. I would love just to binge watch this, but
that would have made Amy and my job incredibly difficult.
We would not have slept for dead. 2 weeks.
Yes, exactly.
But I tell you, it would be fun to watch for a weekend just to see, like how everything progresses.
Yeah.
After waiting for 2 years, I think if it dropped all at once, I'd be like, I like that it's being stretched out, that I'm not, basically stuffing my face with snacks all at one time. I'm stretching it out, and it's a treat every week.
Oh yes,
yeah.
Oh yes. I mean, I enjoy this too, but I can see how some shows, when they drop them all at one time, you're like, it's time for the buffet,
Yeah.
We're Trekkies. We want it both ways.
Yeah.
It's just what we are.
It's just how we roll.
Yes.
Well, I wanted to say that I feel that I see Gene Roddenberry's vision in Michael Burnham. And now that I'm getting to know her more, like when she meets Lorca and she is like, I'm all Starfleet. I want to do what's right. And you can hear her pride and her true passion for being in Starfleet and being there for the right reasons. And then in this episode, when she's not making assumptions about the tardigrade, that she's like, we don't know its intentions. This could be acting out of self-defense, which in the end it was. Like, she's using her logic. She's using this don't jump to conclusions. And that, to me, is such Star Trek philosophy. Like, I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to assume the worst based on one action. Like, that spoke volumes to me. Like, she was telling that to Landry. And it's like, are you talking about the tardigrade or are you talking about me? I mean, don't judge and look at the facts and do this critical scientific hypothesis and test your theories, and to me, that just speaks Star Trek, and that is the philosophy. So I know that these episodes are very dark in nature, but I can still see this philosophy that's shining through, and especially so much in Michael Burnham.
I agree. That makes a lot of sense.
And in episode 1, I think if we're a microcosm of that is Ensign Connor or Yeoman Connor, the person who unfortunately went out the airlock in the security room when he had the concussion and walked in there instead of going to the doctor. The bridge guy.
Oh yeah.
I just felt he was just like, we're Starfleet. Why is this happening? Like, we shouldn't be fighting. We should be, it was just like, that was a little nail on the head, but I saw that whole kind of like Tilly. It's just that optimism is sort of wrapped up in that character. And he was just unfortunately gone in an instant.
Well, it sure has been fun talking about episode 4 of Discovery today. But this isn't the only thing we've been discussing on the network. even though it might sound like it to you. So here's a quick look at some of the other things you may have missed elsewhere on Trek FM.
Previously on Trek.fm, Literary Treks.
Yeah, so Trip, of course, is working to take down Section 31. We as Star Trek fans who have watched all of the shows and read a bunch of other novels know how that's ultimately going to go. But in this story, he's, kind of convinced that Harris is Section 31, kind of the be-all and end-all. He's at the top. It's his own private little army that he's constructed, and Trip is aiming to take them down.
The 602 Club.
And this is happening a lot more in the Star Wars books, and I think it's because it allows them freedom, which is to do books that become character studies. And I think it's very clear that this book, in a lot of ways, is a character study of who this person is and what it is that causes the actions that we see in The Force Awakens to make more sense.
Stage 9, a podcast about the people who make Star Trek.
By getting people like Braga to come on board and work on this show, what they're going to be doing is deconstructing that thing that they did for all those years on Star Trek.
Earl Grey.
Is there anything else we need to add, or do we think that's the?
Are we going to cure Riker, or?
Oh shoot! I forgot about Riker. Yeah, sure, fine. We'll keep him around.
Yeah, we've cured Riker, and then for me, this would or not.
And that's what else is happening on Trek.fm.
Check out all of these shows and join the conversation about your favorite corner of the Star Trek universe and beyond. You'll find us wherever you get your podcasts.
If you are an Apple user, be sure to hit the subscribe button in Apple Podcast on iPhone, iPad, or Apple TV, or the desktop iTunes app to get the latest episodes as soon as they are published. And please leave us a star rating and written review. If you are not an Apple user, we got you covered as well. You can find our shows on Google Play, Music, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spreaker, SoundCloud, Windows Phone, and most third-party apps, and you can stream and download the MP3 file from our website or grab the RSS link.
We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's show, and there are many ways for you to do that. The best place is in the Babel Conference. That's our listeners group on Facebook. Just type Babel, B-A-B-E-L, into the search field on Facebook, and it should come right up.
If you'd like to send us an email, you can use the form on our website at trek.fm/contact. Choose to send to a show and select the Edge. That will come right to us. You can also find the network on Twitter at TrekFM and Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. So, Davis, where can we find you on the interwebs?
You could find me on Facebook at Davis Grayson. You could see me inside the Babel Conference from time to time. And you could also check me out on Instagram at Springer_2017. Amy, where can people find you on the network?
Well, you can find me here on Postcards from the Edge. That's our weekly show, mailbag show, drops on Thursday. You can find me hosting Earl Grey with Justin Ozer and Richard Marquez, and that's our podcast for the next generation. You can also find me on Twitter at Miss Amy Nelson, but my favorite place is on the Babel Conference. Aaron, where can people find you on the network?
You can find me as a co-host on Saturday Morning Trek, our Star Trek the Animated Series podcast and all things Trek in the 1970s. And you can find me on Twitter and pretty much any other social media with the username at GeekFilter. And I'm also on the Babel Conference quite a bit.
Yes. Well, if you'd like to help us keep all our shows coming to you each week, you can become a patron of the network on Patreon. And as Davis and I were discussing, that's where we first met, was on our Patrons Roundtable. So there are lots of perks that if you choose to become a patron, you can get early access, exclusive content, like I said, the roundtables. There's so much available if you do choose to donate and help out the network. You know, it requires a great deal of money to produce and distribute these shows each month, and we really appreciate any support that you could give us and hope that you'll join the team. We'd like to thank our associate producers, Norman Lau, Tony Robinson, Thomas Puleo, Lisa Slack, and Shoaib Mirza. Thank you so much for supporting The Edge. Davis, it has been so wonderful to have you here on The Edge. Thank you so much for coming on.
It has been a pleasure. Thank you both for having me on.
Well, join us next week for another episode of The Edge.